Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode here at FAQ. At my table, this is your host, your sister, Grace, also known as Grace or Gracea. And as per usual, I have another beautiful episode for you here today. It is a testimony and one of our series that we do here. This is my story, and I have a special guest here who is going to share her story, a very powerful one. So without further doing, I am going to introduce you to my beautiful guest, Collette. Collette, how are you?
Very good, thank God. I'm very good. Very grateful to be here, and I don't take it for granted.
Amen. When we are honored to have you here, and looking forward to hearing for the second time your story, because I know the first time I heard it, I was truly touched. And all I could think of, I need to have this woman to come and share her story. So I am grateful that it is happening today. So Collette, I always start my videos with a prayer. So just a very small prayer to welcome the Holy Spirit and let him lead us in this conversation. So faithful God, we thank you, wonderful God. We just honor you, and we just come before your presence saying thank you for blessing us with this beautiful day. And we thank you, faithful God, for just allowing us to gather today and just hear this beautiful story. And we just acknowledge the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, we thank you for being here in our midst. And we just say, come and have your way. Just let every word that will come out of our mouths, Holy Spirit, be inspired by you, inspired by the heart of the Father in heaven. And yes, let this moment honor you and bless your people. Edify those who are here and those who will watch us online. For your glory alone, faithful God. In Jesus' name we have prayed.
Amen.
Amen. So Collette, this is the first time we have you here. So if you could maybe just introduce yourself, your name, Collette, but where are you from? Are you from Cork? What do you do? Yeah.
My name is Collette Wolf. I'm living in Youghal. Well, we just moved since last October. I'm married to Anthony Wolf. Anthony is a construction manager in a building firm. I'm in college. I worked in Marks and Spencer's for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And in 2021 I had enough and I decided to leave, and I, after a couple of weeks of thinking I was going to retire, because I'm now 64, I'll be 65 in January. I felt that I was 60 when I retired, in Marks and Spencer's, and I felt, enough was enough. So I thought I was going to have a grand old time and, not have the pressures of a full-time job but after a couple of weeks being at home, I felt that's not it, even though I have a ministry outside this, full-time ministry. So I phoned CSN College in the Tramore roundabout, and I went out to meet them. I was terrified because I'd never had no academic background, and I couldn't read or write until God touched my life a few years back. So I went out to learn how to do an email, and I ended up doing the back to education, went on to do social studies, and then I sat the exam from level 5 to level 8 for UCC for social science. So I'm just on my final year now in UCC for social science, youth and community.
Wow. Amazing.
God is good. God could only be God.
Yeah. Wow. So I guess, Collette, I'm going to let you have the word. So just express yourself whichever way. Just tell your story the way you want it to be told. You want it out there. So if I've got any questions, I hope it's okay. I may ask you just so we can get a better understanding. But the table is yours.
Okay. Perfect. Like I said, good evening to everyone that will hear this and that are here tonight. And thank you, Grace. What a beautiful name. I love the song. I touched your grace, my life has changed. So I said, because it's only by God's grace I'm sitting here. So like I said, I'm living in Youghal, but I grew up in the south side of Cork, which was Ballyfihan. I came from a large family. I would be on the youngest part. There were like 2 generations. My father was an alcoholic, and my brothers were no better. There was sexual abuse and there was violence. I had a beautiful mother before anybody started feeling sorry for me. I had a beautiful mother and I had lovely sisters that I suppose in that time, you know, when you're very young, I was 8 to 11 when I was sexually abused.
Wow.
From the age of 8 to 11. And when you're that young and you know no different, you know, you just think this is your norm. And like people would say to you after I became a Christian, how could you be normal? But it was, you know, it wasn't like that. Back then, you know, nothing was spoken about and, you know, it was swept underneath the carpet and then you just continued with life. I met my husband when I was 15, he was 16, Anthony, and I knew he was the man for me, but I wasn't going to leave him know that because I had an experience of men in our home and I was thinking, you know, you show no fear or you show no interest, you know, or they make a fool out of you or, you know, it would turn on you. So I was always very cagey where men was concerned. And later on, before I turned 17, we decided to have a break. Well, we didn't decide to have a break. I asked him, could I have a break? Because my friend was saying I was very young to be going steady at that age. And so Anthony, and the gentleman that he was, he told me I could have the rest of my life. Oh. So he wasn't pleased with that. So with the cut a long story short, I ended up going to a do, which was a job do. Okay. And I met a young man there that I liked, and that night he ended up raping me. Oh no. And so I was 17 and guards were involved and everything that you could possibly say that was involved. You know, when the guards were out in your home and, you know, he gave me a terrible beating. You know, I was bruised from my head to my toes, I'd say. And I felt so much shame because I thought, you know, I'm after being sexually abused. Now I was raped, you know, is there something about me that, you know, draws this negative towards me? But it was a very hard time. I think this was a very hard time because I think when you're 17, you don't want that negative, you know, around you. You don't want people to know, you know, these things that, you know, 17-year-olds don't want nobody to know nothing about them, only what they want them to know. But I was very blessed really because it would have gone to court only for his parents paid for a flight on the same night and he was brought to England. He was sent to England, which turned out good for me. You might not understand this now, Grace, or people watching, but at a time it would have been the woman that would have really been ridiculed. Did she do something? Was she looking for it? Or, you know, I remember weeks later, about 6 weeks later, my mum came into my room and she says, you have to go back to work. I never forget, I thought, I can't, you know, I cannot face anybody, I cannot look at anybody, you know, I was so ashamed and, you know, and then it was a meat factory, so it was very men orientated, you know, so it was all men, but I never forget, you know, hating my mother for her making me to go. And I remember that first day that I went, you know, it was early in the morning, it would have been 6 o'clock that you'd leave. And I remember going out and my heart was in my mouth and I really wanted to throw up, to be quite honest. Every fear that could come in to me. I didn't know God, never had a relationship with God. And I remember, you know, getting out there and I could hear the whispers, you know, and I could hear the men, you know, slagging one another, you know, saying, you know, she was looking for it. I was only a child when you think of it. They were grown men, you know, that should have probably known better, like, but I suppose I was today's story. And then with it, I thought I was pregnant. And I was so afraid because, you know, Cork was a small place at the time and I was thinking if I'm pregnant, everybody will know that it's a rape baby. And I was concerned about me and I was concerned what the baby will have to grow up with, you know, so it was the first time I think I ever called him God. Yeah. And I asked him, I said, if I'm not pregnant, I never look at this experience and never pin me down or keep me back. And you know, God was faithful even to someone that never even looked to him. And I wasn't pregnant. But in between it, Anthony came out one day with a big bouquet of roses. And then before, you know, in between going back to work. And it showed me who he was, really, you know, that you can imagine the talk was gone around at this stage. That even here, he heard it himself that I was pregnant. You know, people like drama and they like that, more drama to it. But he came out and he just, it was the only young boy himself. Like I was 17, he was only 18 and, you know, but he was a man, you know, and he came out.
And he knew what he wanted.
He knew what he wanted and I suppose, you know, to see him coming that day, you know, was like coming in the door really when there was actually been so much darkness. So we went on and we got married after 5 years. We were from 5 years, if you take the little gap in between, together. He always gets wound up over this. He actually never asked me to marry him. And I still actually give out to him to this day because he just took it for granted. He brought me into the jewellers and the man and he said, pick out a ring. Oh. But you know, I was so excited to pick out the ring, I was delighted. But you know, but afterwards I thought, he never done him on here, did the whole drama. But we got married and we ended up having our son, Anthony, in 2021, 1981. And I fell in love. I fell in love with motherhood because I felt that I'd done it right. I felt I could do this. You know, children don't judge you. So, you know, they won't see all the bad things that happened to me. They won't know about the bad things because I was always covering up things. So I couldn't read or write. So, and I had hid that from my husband even for the first couple of years. But he knew. He told me afterwards he knew. And every time he would mention a mortgage, I'd break out in a cold sweat because I thought, you know, more shame. You know, I'd go to the bank and they say, put your ex there. I could write my name. I remember my sister taught me how to write my name, but I could never understand why I couldn't spell. I couldn't read because they could all spell around me and all read around me. And I just found it it didn't make sense to me. And like Anthony would, you know, eventually he'd break up the word for me. It didn't make sense for him. My sister would do it, people would do it. And I thought, I want to kill him. And the extremes that I went to in work, they didn't know. I couldn't read or write. Now, when I was tested afterwards, when I was 61, when I was assessed, she told me I'm highly intelligent to be able to hide it, but I did because you'd have to see the hard work that went in it. So that was like another shame that was there, you know, not being able to read or write, do the normal things. And when there would nobody be around, like you have to understand, like not to be able to write a birthday card to your child or your happy birthday to your husband and have to depend on other people to do these things for you, and then you're hiding it because you don't want your children to know that you couldn't read or write, and you know, and always the fear was there no matter wherever you went, if you were in a chemist, a pharmacist, or if you were, you know, anywhere, and the minute you see a form, the sweat would roll out through me, you know. My husband used to say to me, why do you get so worked up? But I said it was grand because he could read and write, but when you can't, you know, it's like, you know, why can't you read or write? I couldn't understand. I was probably my hardest critic, to be quite honest. So, will I continue?
Please continue. I just a question though. You know, it seems like with all that has happened, you know, you never tell. How did you get over? Did you do some therapy?
No.
Who did you?
There was no therapy back then. I have to say, there was not, and you just get on and get on with it. And I think that's later on, God was my counselor, and it was God actually done it. You know what I mean? Of course, you know, people would say like, I carried everything inside, so it was internal. You know, so everything was in there. You know what I mean? You know, like a time bomb ready to come out. You know, but I was very introverted. People wouldn't believe that now. They don't believe that when they see me jumping all over the church dancing or what have you. It would have been my husband Anthony that would have done the talking. And if I had got a t-shirt, and I would have been small, but if I had got a t-shirt and it was a wrong size, even in Dunn's or anywhere, I would be too ashamed to change it. My sister would have to go in and change it because I would have no confidence. I had no confidence really. You know, there was no self-esteem really. I just felt that when I put it all down, I felt dirty, I felt useless, and I felt that, you know, motherhood, I enjoyed motherhood. I felt, you know, that was a really, really big thing for me, motherhood, because I was going to get this right, because, you know, they love you unconditionally, even if you're, you know, you can't read or you can't write, even though they didn't know for years, they still loved me. They weren't expecting me to be the person that I thought I should be. So no, there was no counselling, there was nothing then, you know, I never even spoke to anyone, not even my husband. You know, he knew about the sexual abuse, because he said he knew there was something funny not right in our home. And then we had another sister that would, when she'd have a couple of drinks, things would come out. You couldn't kind of shut her up, you know, that kind of way, because there was 3 girls, 3 of us that were abused, and each of us handled it differently. And, you know, so my way of handling it was probably not facing it and just burying it, and and every time that it would rear its ugly head, like if I was in work in Marks and Spencer's, and if we said there was a programme on and it was on about incest or rape,
Yeah.
I'd feel whoever I'd be sitting around the table, would I think, oh my God, they know it's me. They know that there's something about me, and, you know, I was paranoid all the time.
Of course.
But nobody would have known that. You know, I was very, very, very good at hiding things.
And how did your mom manage it all?
Do you know, my mum really, I gave her a tough time for a long time. And the tough time was that I really never left her in. You know, I'd be polite and kind, and, you know, I'm happy because, like I said, I hated confrontation, so I couldn't but deep down I resented her, and I didn't even probably realise it. And she was an outstanding mother. She didn't drink or didn't smoke or didn't, you know, she really bought something for herself. Like when I was married, and if I borrowed, we said £20 at the time off my mum, you'd have to pay that £20 back. She'd chase you down for it if you weren't after paying it, but you'd give that £20 and she'd slip you £100 going out the door. You know, you'd open your front door to a knock, and there'd be £50 worth of meat that she'd be after sending up, but she'd send it to every one of her children. You know, and
that was her way of showing love.
It was her way, like she would have died for her children.
Wow.
But she did things wrong, and there was no one. The Catholic Church at the time would have been a big part of our lives. And when the priest came up, he said like that, siblings experiment. And I remember that's probably where I put my God against God. I'm thinking, you know, if that's God, you know, they can have him. And I think my mum just didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
Like later on in life, I remember I had an argument. I didn't very rarely argue with my mum. I had this big argument, and I gave her what was what. I told her all what I was feeling and what she did wrong and what have you. And of course, it was a Patrick's Day actually. And I never forget that night I was at home, and I was feeling so guilty. You know, I was thinking, you know, she was a woman that loved even, you know, if her grandchildren, our grandson married a woman that had 2 children. Them 2 children were my mum's great-grandchildren. She seemed no different from the rest of them. When they come in, everybody was equal. There was a lovely spirit. Now I know that she knew God, because she used to always say to me, pray to God, and I was thinking, what's he going to do for me? Do you know, and she always had peace and joy. But that Patrick's Day, I ripped into her that night when I was at home. And I know that it must have been only a revelation from God, because when I was sitting there, you know, in the room, I couldn't tell Anthony, couldn't tell no one all the horrible things I was after saying, you know. And then I was sitting there, and I had this talk come into my head, you know, that, you know, if my son done something really bad, or my daughter's done something really bad, could I just cut him out of my life? Could I just, what way would I be? And then the thought came to me, like, mothers have children that, and, you know, sons and daughters that have committed murder, have done worse things, and you know, they love their children. And then I think I was realising love is unconditional. You might hate the act, as like Jesus, now when you think of it, like everything that I did against God, he hated, but he actually loved me. Do you know? And that's what God showed me, like, which was, when you think at the time that I had no spiritual background, no one around to tell me that, you know, God loves me or what have you. And I didn't even kind of relate it to God. I thought this was my own revelation. And I thought, this is really big thinking, you know. And I remember I went out and I gave her the biggest hug, and I told her, you know, she made mistakes, but we all make mistakes. And Grace, I ask you, which one of us don't make mistakes? Even when we become Christians, which one of us don't make mistakes? As a mother, I've made many mistakes, do you know? But the thing is not to hide them or bury them. The thing is to admit it, you know, apologise if we need to,
do better,
and you know, and do better. So I continued. I had 2 sisters I have 4 sisters, but I had 6 sisters, but I was very extremely close to these 2. 4 of them actually, and then there was a girl in England that I was just extremely close to Annabelle. But my sister that I was very close to her was Frances. I just loved her. She just knew everything about me. She was the only person in the whole wide world that knew every detail about me. She knew my fears, she knew, you know, the shame that I carried, and she was always the one to encourage me. And we had our children together, and she had twins, and I had my daughter Leanne, because I had 3 children at this stage now. Anthony, my eldest daughter Trina, and Leanne. We waited 7 years for Leanne.
Wow.
And she had twins, and she had Leonard and Leanne. There was 10 days between them, so I used to see her back door from my front door. And when Lizelle was 11 months old, when she was 8 months old, 3 months old first, she got very ill, and she got meningitis, meningococcal meningitis. She wasn't meant to survive, but she did. And the only kind of thing that she had was, you know, her right arm hand was a little bit weak. So we used to be working with that. We used to be putting a ball into her hand and what have you. And we never realised like that nearly 14 months later, she got it back.
Is that the last born or this?
It was. She had more children after this.
Oh, okay.
These twins, they probably wouldn't have been only for what happened. So then when Lizelle was nearly 2, she got it back.
Oh.
And she died.
Oh.
She was actually buried on Bonfire Night, because I can remember like thinking, God, the day was forever. It was just, and it's the longest day of the year that she was buried. And it really broke her, because she was a mother. She was just the kindest person. She was very like my mum, very kind, and just, you know, it was all about her family and her children. And it really, really broke her. And, you know, it broke all of us, because they were she had a double buggy and I had a single buggy. But it's my daughter used to be, and Leanne would be in the double buggy, and Lizelle used to be in my single buggy, because we were afraid Leonard would beat her, because, you know, she was after being so sick.
Right.
And so she, you know, it was just, and so France ended up having 2 children after that, really, 3 children fairly close, I'd say. Very, very close. Trying to, I think it's like replacing. It's not, and you know, you're trying to fill that gap, that hurt and the pain. Nothing replaces it. But within a short time after her youngest little boy was just 2, she was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, wow.
And she fought it for nearly 3.5 years. She had a bone marrow transplant and the whole lot. I could never imagine that life without her. And I never thought that she could actually, you know, she could die, because this woman was invincible. You know, I felt like there was no knocking her down, because she'd get her in one place and come back in another place, and, you know, and at the end she got very, very ill. And I used to stay to do the nights in the hospital with her. And it was coming up to Leanne's birthday. And she said to me one day, she says, Collette, Leanne is after having a real tough time, because the half a twin was the same age as Leanne. So, you know, it was Frances bought her first dress after that, because I used to be afraid to put Leanne into a dress in case Frances would be, you know, thinking, oh, Lisa, because Frances loved all the pretty dresses and the whole house. And so Leanne was coming up to her 11th birthday. And so we were going to throw her a big party, because she was having a lot of grief in her life and the whole lot. And like, and in the meantime, like, I would do a lot of rushing and running, because her husband was not available, in the sense that he was an alcoholic. And so, you know, when they he became an alcoholic really after his daughter died, you know, it just broke him, you know what I mean? It broke the whole family really. And so I just never thought that anything could happen to her. And the night before Leanne's birthday, we were after booking the Mardyke, and we were pulling out the whole stops now, to be quite honest, because we were saying we're going to give her, and all the other children then would benefit as well, and there'd be a day away from sickness, away from the graveyard, away from the whole tragedy of life. And he was such a hard worker. Like, he'd come home from work and he'd take my children and take her children, and he'd end up feeding them all. Like, but I think, like, it showed who he was to me, who he was. And I think, I think I fell in love with him around the time that my sister was so unwell, that I think I didn't love him at the start. I think he was just, I could trust him and depend on him, and I didn't know what love was, because I couldn't love myself and love anybody else. So I was there on the night before Leanne's birthday, and I was staying up in the hospital, and about 2:00 I said, Frances, I'm going. They were lovely up there in the Mercy now, and they just wouldn't know what to do for it. And she said, go on. So I went off out to the car, and I headed off home, and when I got to the door, he was at the door, and he says, you have to go back to the hospital. And I said, for why? He says, just go back to the hospital. And he couldn't come because he had the children. And so I went back up, and I went in. I remember holding my breath, I was thinking, like, and when I went up, she was lying in the bed, and I says, for the love of God, what's going on with you? So she was after spewing up a teaspoon of blood, and kind of fear came into her. I suppose she didn't want to die alone either. Who wants to die alone? And I killed her. I said, I'm exhausted. We were exhausted from hospitals, from Dublin, back and forth. It was non-stop. My life was actually chaos, completely chaos. There was no normality with it. So I got back home, and I fell asleep. And I said, I'll never forget it. I was like somebody that the cat dragged in, because I had a warm jumper thrown over me. I didn't even get underneath the quilt covers or anything, and he was gone to work. And the phone rang. And when I answered it, I knew she was gone. And I never forget going up there, like, and they all arrive. And then I remember looking and thinking, like, is it real? It was very surreal. Frances' death, that even for weeks afterwards, I'd go off the phone, and I'm on the way, and I'd have to take a step back and say, oh gosh, she's not there. Yeah. She's not there anymore. So it was a real difficult time. And I remember Leanne up in the hospital, she turned around, she says, Ma'am, why would Frances die on my birthday?
Oh no.
And I remember, like, when I read it in her diaries afterwards, in Leanne's diaries, I said to her, like, I couldn't even remember what I said to her at the time, but afterwards, when you read it, for what Leanne wrote, I said to her, so that you'd never forget her. And she looked at me, she said, how could somebody forget somebody as beautiful as Frances? So I remember things were bad for a while, and you can't, say you can't protect children from grief, because you can't, because it affects your mind, your body, every area of your life, and you're grief stricken, and that's exactly what it was. And you can imagine the children were grief struck, and the whole of my mum was keeping us all together. And just to see her, and she was so close to Frances, holding up, and to see her, advise and what have you, was just unreal. But she was gone, as far as I was concerned, and it just took a lot out of me. And within 3 years, another favourite sister died. She had angina to the stomach.
It's like one heartache after another.
So, and she died, and she was just lovely. She was just, she was a right little pushover, Annabelle, and she was actually one of the best looking ones out of her. She was stunning, and she had a hard life. She married a man that was so jealous of her over being so good looking. It sometimes left her paid, or you can't win. And but she never had a bit of bone in her body, and she passed on. And I just felt, and I think it was the first time that I seen my mum actually kind of crumbling, because
losing two children,
and I felt like, God Almighty, she kind of, she'd phone the hospital every day, and they'd have to tell her that she was dead.
Oh, no.
So she ended up getting meningitis and cellulite shingles, but it was completely grief. But she came out, and she came through it, like, and she picked herself back up. And I used to often wonder, like I say, like when you'd go, she'd be full of joy to see you, and she'd come, we'd always take her. She was never left to her own devices, because my dad had died previous, and something. My dad was a whole book that you could write another book about. But so I just, my mum was just, she was a bundle of joy. Really, is the only way you could explain to her. Oh, I know that she had God in her life, and that she depended her life on God, and it wasn't in human beings, because people had always left her down. But so we trotted through life, and, you know, you're trying to pick up the fragments of your life. And I remember thinking, my God, like, every birthday that I'm after having, big major birthdays, something tragedy happens. I was just turning 40. I was going to have the biggest celebration, and, you know, and the whole lot. And Francis just died before my 40th. So the children were saying, your 50th. When your 50th comes, we're going to give you the biggest 50th party. And so we were 46. We were living in Rathcormac. We downsized so that we could pay off our mortgage, but we left 100,000 on it, and we said we'd have a good life. Now there was only me, Leanne, and Anthony, my husband, and we bought her a brand new car. We know the other two were after getting new cars when they turned 17, and she was the same. She was after getting it for her 17th birthday. So we eventually moved from there to Carricktown, and Leanne was just, I had Leanne, Trina, and Anthony, and Leanne had a son now at this stage. Trina had a son, and Anthony's girlfriend at the time was expecting. They're married now, they're husband and wife. And I remember, like, then Leanne, you know, she was coming up to her leaving cert, and she was after applying to England for midwifing. So that was where she was planning to go. To be quite honest, if you asked me then, was there anything that I seen out of the ordinary? Nothing. Nothing. There was nothing. She was your average teenager that kind of give a back cheek, or, you know, you put down to hormones and what have you. So her 18 came on the 10th of March, and we were after discussing. I said, what would you like, Leanne? Would you like a big celebration? And you know, she said, no, I just want to go for a meal with you and Daddy, her nan, and my son and his partner, and my daughter and her partner, and the children. That's what she wanted. And, you know, something to be secretly done. I was so happy because, you know, grief leaves its mark, you know, and especially when you haven't God, it leaves a deep wound, you know what I mean? So, you know, the way life was, you don't look at life like that anymore. So she and she made a fortune. And funny enough, before it, she was only between a 10 and a 12 in size. But she used to wear baggy jumpers, and, you know, coming up before she died, coming up, you know, she'd wear baggy jumpers. And I was saying, Leanne, in all fairness, that's 3 times too big for you, or what have you. And she was saying, I'm getting very big, ma'am. Or she said to me, I'm on a diet, no, I'm not going to eat, or what have you. But you see, 2 years previous to her 18, before... 3 years, she was 15, and she came in with a black eye. And we were in a state of shock because I came from violence. My husband would have come from it. So that wasn't what we were having in our home. We mightn't have having God in the centre, but we had morals that God gives us all morals. We know right from wrong. And I knew this wasn't the way that, you know, my dad would beat us, or my brothers would beat us, you know what I mean? And, you know, we'd fight our brothers back. We'd defend, like there'd be 4 girls jumping on one brother, you know, defending ourselves. So, like, when I never had fear with that, because our brothers were very big and blocky, you know, and what have you, but we jump on them and show no fear, you know. We grew up with that attitude, don't show no fear, you know. Put on your dress out yourself up, and, you know, don't leave the world, you know. So, when she came into black eye, we were nearly in a state of shock. So we did what every other parent would do. We went to their home, and we told them that if it happened again, that we'd end up going to the guards and going a lot further. And then, of course, my daughter said that she'd mangle him, my older daughter, and she would have been like her dad, more outspoken. You know, he went the opposite afterwards, and kind of like roles reversed. You know, he went into first and I went out the first. But and she didn't want us to go. She didn't want to tell us first, you know. But, you know, as a parent, like, what would you do? I asked, you know, so many times, like, we've spoken, you know, in different television programmes, RT, you know, The Late Late Show, would you believe, Secret Millionaire, you know, Ireland AM, all different radio stations. And I'm always asked, like, you know, how I often wanted to ask myself, what could you have done any different than what we did, but go to their homes and think that you're after doing the right thing? But what we didn't realise is that we made it 1,000 times worse. But she kept it all quiet. They vandalised her car. They hit her. Actually, she came in one night when we were in Rathcormac, And it was it was a very sad time afterwards, even tried to deal with that. And all her hair was torn out, and she had bruises, and you know, me and Trina brought her up into the shower, and we were all crying, to be honest, you know what I mean, because, you know, she wasn't a big girl, and you know what I mean, and we were saying, what happened, Deanne? And she said she was heading to a car, and she said that there was 4 girls that she didn't know them, and that they jumped her, but afterwards we knew that she knew them when what we found. And we were saying, we're going to the guards, and she nearly lost her life. She said, please don't, and you know, at the end, I just felt, you know, we'll have to leave, but, you know, and we just, like, she came into our bed, and, you know what I mean, we did what a parent does, and her sister did, you know, comfort her and loved her, and told her how beautiful and wonderful she is. And then, of course, after her birthday, I have a watery eye. It's from probably the light, so excuse me, it's not tears. So we had for her birthday, that's what she wanted, but she made a fortune. But I never forget, the night of her birthday, she came down the stairs, and I was in awe, because it was like she was after stepping into her own. She was after stepping into a beautiful young woman. And, you know, she was stunning, you know, she had a beautiful fitted dress, and I was even after forgetting how small she was. And, you know, she was, you know, just dark, and she was just, you know, natural kind, and, you know, where Trina would have been fairy, and you'd have had to put on the fake tan on Trina, and, you know, because she wouldn't sit out in the sun, where Leanne would sit out, and she was very like me.
Yeah,
she'd sit out, where actually my husband would be the same, he'd run underneath a tree, where I said, you have to work to get a colour. You know what I mean? It's not going to come in the door with you. Like, you're very blessed. I should have been born a different colour, but look, you have to take what you're given. So, and she just looked beautiful, and then I forget, she went out to my mum's, and we went out as well, you know, but we were all excited, you know, and she was just beautiful, like, and my mum, you know, was saying, oh my God, you know, she was just a stunning young girl, and I was thinking, and she knows it now, that she's not, you know, this person that needs to shy away, and you know, it was just lovely, and then we, 2 days later, she was meant to come with us, we were going to Lanzarote. And a couple months beforehand, she was out saying, I'm backing out of that because I had to leave cert. So we had to organise them for our older daughter to come down and stay. I don't know, she was 18, but you know, I still felt she was young. And my son was only around the corner, because we downsized and we followed him, and he was in a duplex. He was after buying a duplex around the corner, so I knew that they'd minded it. So we went to Lanzarote, and the Sunday was Mother's Day actually, and we flew out. And you know something, I went right through the whole week. We had a lovely time, just relaxing, because we were both after been working hard, and, you know, children and home and the whole lot, you know, you're combining, you're working with everything. And I was after going back to work full time when Leanne got older, and then we were there on the Friday night. Friday we went up for our dinner, and we came back, and munchies, we were after getting chocolate and stuff, and we were going to stuff our face. So I said to him, we watch a movie. And I remember that night I looked at Anthony, and I said, you know, Anthony, I said, you know, through everything, I said, you're after being there, you know, and I told him how important he was, and how much I loved him. Because there are things that we don't say enough, really.
That's right.
And I was brought up in a home where you didn't say it, you know what I mean? We thinking, don't show none of that now, because they take advantage of it. And I told him all this, how important he was, and how much I loved him, and, you know, I reflected on, you know, my life of what he had been in my life, and then, like, at the end of it, he looked at me and he says, right back at you. I thought that was his big romance, his big statement. So he's a man of few words. So we went to bed around, I'd say it must have been about 11 o'clock, because we were after being at the beach that day, and I couldn't stay at the beach. I didn't know what was wrong. There was a wind, there was kind of a wind. Now, there's always a wind in Lanzarote, but it never bothered me because it's a warm wind. But this kind of wind, I couldn't rest. I was up, and I said to him at the end, come on, I said, we usually would have went home and got dressed and showered and then go for a meal. But I said to him, come on, we have something to eat, and we go back, and, you know, because we weren't due back until the Sunday. And we went to bed, and we fell off fairly fast, and the phone rang. And it was his work phone, because he was self-employed, and he picked up the phone, and I could hear him saying, where's she gone, Anthony? Where's Leanne gone? And he kept on asking her, where's Leanne gone? I knew he was talking to my son, Anthony, They're both Anthony's. We
both
call
Anthony, yeah.
Small Anthony and Big Anthony, but Small Anthony's after become bigger than Anthony now. It's not Big Anthony, so it's kind of after really causing confusion. So but I knew, I don't know why, I knew in the pits of my stomach that there was something dreadful wrong by the way he was asking. And I took the phone. No, he said at the end, he said 3 times, he said, where's she gone, Anthony? And afterwards he told me, the guard that was in the house, Mark Ryan, turned around and he says, you have to tell him, you have to tell him. And he says, she's dead, Dad, Leanne is dead. And you know, I remember he threw the phone actually, and the phone went all over the place, and he ran to the balcony, and he said he was shouting Leanne is dead. And we were about, I think, I don't know, I don't want to lie now, was it 5 or 7, but I knew that he was going to throw himself off the balcony. And I remember, I don't know why I even said it, I said, Anthony, you're blaming me. And it kind of stopped him in his tracks. And you know, I never see Anthony cry in all my time that I was with him. Imagine that even, you know, I've never seen him, and I just seen him crumbling, you know. And I remember I have never took first place in organising anything. It was always, I stood in the shadows and left Anthony organised. And I remember looking, because he couldn't even talk. His whole, you know, everything, he was broken, completely broken. And I remember putting the phone together. I remember sitting him down and putting the phone together. And I phoned Anthony. And always in a crisis, I always had this thing that could work. Because I grew up in crisis. You know, my life was crisis. So I was always able to, you know, work in a crisis. And I remember there was a fear in me. There was a fear. I was the worst fear that I ever, and I experienced fear in my life. Every time my brother would bring me into that room, I experienced fear. That night, that rape, I experienced fear. You know, I had fear when people would think that I was stupid if they knew I couldn't read or write. But this fear, I never experienced a fear like it. It was consumed me. And I remember going on the phone and I says, hi, Aunt. And he was crying and I could hear my daughter screaming in the background. My older daughter, you know. And I remember, I says, Aunt, what's going on? So he said, it's Leanne, man. And he's a bit like me. He works, he can something set in, and he was able to take control. And I said, what's going on, Aunt? And he said, Leanne is dead, ma'am. I said, okay. I said, I thought she was murdered. To be honest, I thought she was murdered. And he says, I said, because she was in her bed, in her home. And I says, so I says, what happened? And he says, Ma'am, he said, they don't know. And in the next couple of minutes, he said, Ma'am, they're after finding medication. And it was my medication, actually, and my husband. I was after getting disc out removed. So I was on very strong medication. I forgot to bring it. And that was after having a serious accident. And so that's what they found. And because we were never wanted to take medication, but it was medication you had to take. And I remember kind of just there, like, and I said, what's the medication? Like, you know, what's that about? And and he said, they think that she took the medication. And I remember there was all, you know, confusion in the house. You could hear it, you know, and all you want to do is be there because, you know, this is my daughter. I brought her into the world as a mother. I would want to be there to hold her. I knew what death was. I knew by the time I get home, I wouldn't be able to hold my daughter. You know, I wouldn't be able to cradle her. I wouldn't be able to. So I told Anthony, I said, Anthony, clear everybody out of our room and go and knock the door. And he went in and he put everybody out and I said, kneel down by her bed now. He said, ma'am, she's only like 12. So I said, kneel down by her bed. I said, will you put the phone to her ear? And I just said, Leanne, I'm on the way home. Me and Daddy are on the way home. I said, we love you. It's going to be okay. I don't know why I haven't said that because never again was going to be okay. So I remember Anthony's my son. I said, Anthony, you have to take control. It's terrible. And I said, I'm so broken that you have to do this. But I said, you're the only one that we can rely on now. I knew that Trina, they were after giving Trina an anesthetic, what is it? Something to knock her, to calm her down. But it didn't even work, an injection, it didn't even work for her. And so Anthony turned around, he says, ma'am, there's a guard here, his name is Mark Ryan, and he wants to speak to you. I'm thinking, no. He says, Miss Wolf, he said, your daughter sent you a beautiful message. And I said, okay. I said, I didn't receive any. My phone wasn't really working out there. It was only Anthony's work one. This was more dear than mine, so mine was only cheap-ass one at the time, like. So, and next, I said, I didn't receive any. He said, there's a lovely message. He said, the stuff, he said, you have you've a lot to face when you come home. And I said, I know we will. He said, no, but there's other things, he said, that were on Leanne's phone. He said, horrible messages, he said, on her phone. I said, okay. And I remember thinking, like, God, you know, before she died, she's reading these dreadful messages. I said to him, what kind of messages? So he said, look, we wait until you come home. I said, I would prefer, I said, if you can give me what I'm dealing with, because I said I'd like to be prepared. So the message that was on her phone, you whore, you tramp, I know where you live and we're coming down. And, you know, Leanne was the biggest. She would have been like, hated confrontation. So I knew that, you know, there was going to be a lot of fear there. Imagine how scared she must have felt, you know what I mean? So
she was being bullied?
She was being bullied because it all came to a head.
At school, or was
it was everywhere at this stage. It was between text messages, vandalising. Our car was vandalised twice. Actually, we paid $800. It was in actually getting repaired the week that we were going to Lanzarote. She said she didn't know who to done it, but when we went up and collected and all, there was a big gang around. There was about 20 around the whole car. But the cameras weren't on it, so we couldn't prove it. The guard said there was no proof that they'd done it. They told her it was a brand new car, you know, a Yaris, a black Botanic. She was at picking hers, and, you know, allied wheels, you know, and they were after tearing the mirrors off on both sides, and they're all one now, so they were all one at the, so we had to bring it back down to Coke, and it cost $800 and odd to get it fixed. But she collected on the Thursday before she died. On the Friday, she phoned her dad. She said, Dad, my car, like, no, they validated, and the whole lot was only coming up to a year old anyway, because we got it for our 17th birthday. And so I just, you know, you're trying to take all this in. So we tried to arrange to get home, and it was the first time I couldn't talk. Me usually I'd send him out to do the hard, you know, the talking and what have you. So we weren't in a hotel, we were in an apartment block, so there was no rep there that we were trying to get into rep. So at the end we got into a cab and we went up to the police station. They treated us appallingly because, you know, I'd say they didn't probably half understand us, and we were distraught. So they probably thought it was drink or drugs or something else, you know. So I remember coming back out of there and trying to find another cab, and we got back in and we got back into our apartment, and then we got the phone rang, and it was the rep, and she said that she's trying to get us a flight home, and so we'd meet her in the morning at 7 o'clock. And I remember going to pack the case. And I could not pack that case. I could not touch that case. I didn't bring nothing. The only thing I brought, I was after buying her 2 pairs of dolly shoes. I had her camera, and I was after getting another few things. They were the only things that we brought home. I couldn't just, I thought, you know, I couldn't pack that case and just bring it home. And, you know, I find now that even when I'm packing, I find it very hard because, you know, I hate packing now. Where I used to be a professional at it before, when you're packing for 5 and you're going on a plane, you know, you have to be organised. But so it was the worst journey. I remember when we went out, we couldn't get a cab, and she had to put us on the bus, the coach, with the rest of the people that were going on flights. And I remember we were hysterical, crying. You were unconsolable. Like, I was a person that could hold these things in, you know, and here all of a sudden I'm crying in front of complete strangers, you know, and you're not crying, you're wailing because you're broke. And my husband was no different. And, you know, we get to the airport and there's no flight for us, and we're there and you're thinking, oh my God, you know, we just need to get home. And then at the end there was 4 actually taken off a flight because they were drunk, and we were able to get on their flight, but it was going to Dublin. So my son organised a flight from Dublin down to Cork then. So we flew, but I never forget, we were on the plane, you know, and I was saying, I hope this plane goes down. I hope this plane goes down. And then I remember looking around, there was children running around and what have you, and I was thinking, you know, they would like to live. You know, as broken as what you are, you're looking around at other people are not involved in this, you know what I mean? This is our grief, this is our story. And so we get into Dublin, and another hard journey going down. And I remember we get to Cork Airport, and when we get off the plane, there's actually no one in the airport. It was the strangest thing ever. It was like, I was thinking, oh my God, it's the whole carcass after standing still because Leanna's died. You know, this is the way you're thinking. And then I get out, and my niece and my nephew are there, and you're thinking all the way in the flight, you're thinking, maybe it's a mistake, maybe they brought it back to life, maybe because you have no contact in the air, you know, and you're thinking, oh my God, maybe and when we got off in Dublin, we had to run for the flight to get the flight for the car, so we couldn't phone or anything, so we were another length of time, over an hour and a half before we could contact anyone, so we couldn't contact anyone from the time we were flying. And I remember I looked at my niece and I knew it was real. My nephew, I knew this is reality, you know, and I says, you're not coming back from this, Collette. And I remember looking around and I says, there's no one in the airport. I said, the next flight that's coming in, Roy Keane is coming in. I don't know if you know Roy Keane. Roy Keane, he would have been our neighbours, actually. We knew he's well. And he's actually his sister, Hilary, was my niece that died. She was her godmother. Yeah. So we'd have known him well, you know what I mean? So, but he was coming in the next flight, so they had everybody cleared. So I just said, Jessica, take us up to my mum's, because I knew Trina and Leanne was up there, because Trina and Anthony, because that night when they were taking Leanne, my son was crying, you know, they wanted to put her into a bag. Imagine, like, having to deal with that, you know what I mean? People don't see all these things. Like, and I remember going on to the undertakers and just says, please don't do that to the children. They might be older children, but they're my children. I don't want them to have the memory of, you know, the way they're going to bring everything. I said, well, they'll remember. So I said, first of all, I said, she needs to be wrapped in her morning coat that her auntie bought her. My sister France was after buying her a beautiful morning coat before she died. It was threadbare now, because for how long she was wearing it, it was just her comfort, because she loved Frances. And they put a sheet over her, and they brought her out. And then I got on the phone to my sister Laura, so she was there, they were all there. So I said, please take my children out of their home, because they'd be very vulnerable, you know, who's going to be there and, you know, who's going to be calling. They're not meant for that, you know what I mean? So I said, I knew when they get out to my mum's, my mum would look after them, you know what I mean? So they got out, and my mum would have minded them like God. So we get up, and before we get out of the car, I see my two children running out. You know, they're young adults, and they were so broken now. Like, Trina was so scared. She thought I was going to blame her, because she's supposed to be minding her baby sister. Like, you have all this to deal with, you know, people don't see all this part of it, you know. And I remember just going in, you know, and just thinking, and I just said, okay, before I left, we were after looking at Deb's dress, and she was looking at a couple of Deb's dresses, because she was coming up to her Deb's, and I remember thinking, my God, how could it go from a Deb's dress to a coffin? How could it actually go from that? I remember we went down and we seen her, and I remember my daughter, you know, was saying, Mum, you better hold her, because she knew me. My children knew me, you know. I was all hugs. I'm still all hugs. And so, like, even with the youth work that I do now, I have to mind the boundaries. So I have to learn the boundaries, you know, that you can't hug everybody. But my mum was a hugger, and I remember looking. I didn't recognise her, because there was no life there, you know. She was cold, and, you know, it was just.
And how many days now?
She was only dead really a day and a half. Yeah, by the time we got home. But it was just, you know, death comes in very fast as soon as that breath goes, you know. And I've seen it, and you know, with the people that I lost. So I remember looking, like, and thinking my life is over anyway. And I remember I said to Trina, Trina, it's okay, I'll hold it together. You know, but what Trina didn't realise is I was going to hold it together until after she was buried, and then you know, I was out of this world, because I wasn't going to live in a world where there was that much pain and loss, and my whole insides would crave for her. I see my sister that lost her baby, you know, a 2-year-old, and how much she craved for her daughter. So I thought that won't be happening. So we had to organise a funeral. So we went and we were organised a funeral. And on the morning of I remember on the night of our removal, there was crowds, of course, and every tragedy like that, it always attracts thousands. You know, my husband would have been known, I would have been known, my mum would have been known, my sister would have been known. People turn up for respect. It's the kind of thing that it's done in Cork and Ireland. I don't know if it's like that all over Ireland. And it's probably like that all over the world, you know what I mean? So, so we had the removal, and that night, you know, there was these girls came and boys, and I knew them from because they were involved when Leanne had the black eye. So I knew that these people didn't like her. So I was thinking, what are they doing at her removal? But they kept on coming in, you know, they'd line up with all. And at the end, Charlie Sullivan, who was the undertaker, he knew us very well. And, you know, he was after being the undertaker for my sisters, my niece. And, you know, he was just my dad. He was a friend. And he actually, which I didn't know until afterwards, he told them that if they came, he put him outside the door and he said, if he come in once more, he said, I'll get you physically removed. So they left after that. And then on the morning of her funeral, you're facing the worst day of your life. You're going to be putting your 18-year-old daughter she's already in a coffin, now you're going to be putting her into the ground. I remember on the night of the removal, Charlie, the undertaker, says, you know, he says, you can close her in. I remember thinking, you know, oh my God, like, you know, I didn't want nobody else to be the last to see her. Only those that were close, and it was my son and my husband, and I couldn't do it, and my daughter couldn't do it, because it was like, you know, I just couldn't do it. So the day of the funeral, we're trying to find photographs, because we're only 12 weeks in the house, and everything we were after buying a shed, and it was out in the back, and we'd all photographs and everything, but our dad wanted to photograph him for swimming with the dolphins, because he loved that photograph, and you bring things up to the altar, you know, yourself, and in a Catholic church. So, and Trina, I didn't hear no more, and Trina, I heard my daughter screaming.